give us both movement as well as stillness at the same time. Of course, here we'll be talking about the arts, music, words, jars, but they can only take us so far, right? Death, of course, is what living then is all about, right? But notice, we have lots of different kinds of deaths. I mean, your breath that you're taking right now ends. And to that degree, it's like your breath is a single life, which comes to its end, right? The pattern, again, is the key. Everything is about pattern, everything is about rhythms, and oh yeah, religion, for T.S. Eliot. Of course, think about the word religion. What does it mean to do something religiously? Well, that just means you do it over and over again. That's patterns, like breathing, right? Of course, the human body is a lot like this understanding of the Chinese jar as well, if you think about it, right? Of course, the quest is here not to stop the world, but to find some sense of peaceful stillness. Art often will give us that. What is it that Yeats called it in Sailing to Byzantium? Monuments of an aging intellect, right? All right, let's keep going. Line 147. Not the stillness of the violin while the note lasts. We think again of Mozart's, the music is the space between the notes. Not the stillness of the violin while the note lasts. Not that only, but the coexistence, or say that the end precedes the beginning. And the end and the beginning were always there, before the beginning and after the end. Of course, the violin maybe is not as good as the Chinese jar, because the note goes away, whereas the jar is there, right? The still point, or Heraclitus's word, the logos, the beginning and the end are one, collapsed into one. I like to ask artists, we have a work of art there hanging on the wall, don't we, right? To ask the artist, it started out as what? Nothing more than blank canvas. How did you know that it was going to end up like that? What do you mean, how did I know? No, how did you know? Like, when you picked colors, and you put those colors, for example, onto the canvas. How did you know where to start? How did you know that it would end up looking like that? Art reminds us that when an artist is working, the artist is not working in the past or in the future, but only in the present, in the moment, right? We then turn at line 151, and the beginning, and the end and the beginning are always there before the beginning and after the end. And now at line 152, and all is always now. Takes us back to line 150, the end and the beginning are always there. All is always now. All you'll ever have is this. Think about that. All you'll ever have is this. But these present moments, if we can be mindful of them, aware of them, they can be quite compelling for us. Ask any musician. The musicians in the house, they know exactly what I'm talking about. Ask any musician, while you're performing, do you think about what you're doing? Right? No, you can't. Why? Because the minute I start thinking about playing the clarinet, I'm no longer able to play the clarinet well. I have to just get up there and go into a zone and just do it. Right? In the Japanese tradition, we call this Zen mind, don't we? Right? Where there is no mind, and yet fully, we would say there is mind. Because obviously it takes an amazing mind to perform the music or whatever. At line 152, then, he turns to talk about the limits of words. And those of us who have struggled to ever write, which of course is all of us, we understand the difficulty of words. Those of us who have ever tried to speak, that's all of us. The difficulty of words. Why? What's wrong with words? Well, again, it's back to that it's impossible to say just what I mean line from Proof Rock. What's wrong with words? Look at all the different verbs. Words strain, crack, sometimes break. Then notice the prepositions again. Under the burden, under the tension. And then to go back to it, what else do words do? They slip, they slide, they perish, they decay with imprecision. Notice in the second line of Bert Norton, perhaps, imprecision, can't be exact. They will not stay in place, will not stay still. Words are always moving. Right? Of course, it's a funny thing. The lecture that I've been giving, if I'd given it in Russian, it wouldn't mean anything to you, but you would know that there was words involved, right? Where did the meaning of words come from? Well, that's engagement in minds, between me and between you, and our minds somehow dialogically can converse through words. And yet, there's always the difficulty of do you know what I mean? Don't we even say that sometimes while we're talking? Do you know what I mean? And somebody goes, yeah, I know what you mean. Of course, we're going to get to the word love here in a little bit. It'll be used for the first time in our poem. But think about the ways in which we use that L word all the time. And the young student of mine who, that evening with her guy, and he said, I love you, and she looked back at him and said, what does that mean to you? And he got really frustrated. You know exactly what it means. No, I know what it means to me. What does it mean to you? For those of us who have ever tried to describe something we desperately wanted to describe, oh yeah, that's T.S. Eliot. He has been, throughout this poem, Bert Norton, trying to speak words, and then at the end he tells us it doesn't work very well. The words are limited. We think, of course, Plato, who played this game initially, defining your terms, of course, is ironic, because he said the only thing I know is that I don't know anything. Go back to our Harvard Classics lectures on the apology, right? We think as well, of course, of the great philosophers of language, those philologists like Wittgenstein and like Nietzsche, who as well pointed out it all comes down to the way we use language and the way we understand language, right? It won't stay still. Words won't stay still. Notice the irony. He's seeking the still point at the turning world. Shrieking voices, line 156, which of course are juxtaposed to children laughing. Shrieking voices, scolding, mocking, merely chattering. We're back to a twittering world again. Always assail them, the words, right? In other words, no matter what we say about this poem, there's always going to be somebody that wants to say something else. Fascinating. Then at line 158, the word, and it's capitalized, logos, the word in the desert. And here we're having an immediate, a direct reference to Jesus Christ, of course, from John 1. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. The same was in the beginning with God. The Word became flesh and dwelt among us. The Word, the logos, Christ in the desert, is most attacked by voices of temptation. The crying shadow in the funeral dance, the loud lament of the disconsolate chimera. And immediately, of course, we're thinking as well about the temptations of Christ, both in Matthew 4 as well as, of course, in Paradise Lost, Milton's Paradise Lost. The crying shadow in the funeral dance immediately makes us think about Plato's shadows in Republic 7, doesn't it? The chimera, of course, is that Greek myth. By the way, let's just point out, Greek myth has been here with us the whole time. We've been studying in Bert Norton, kind of standing behind so much of what T.S. Eliot is saying. The chimera, of course, the body and the head of a lion, another head of a goat. We've got the tail of the snake. That is to say, the chimera doesn't know who it is. This is, of course, maybe Eliot's suggestion that we moderns, or postmoderns as we would call ourselves today, we try to be a whole bunch of things at the same time, and we lament or we cry about the fact that we really don't know at all who we are anymore, right? Line 162 then begins the end of the poem. The detail of the pattern is movement. And, of course, this has been the whole poem. I can't really explain, he says to you, what spiritual revitalization looks like, but I can kind of give you a template or a pattern or a map. And as we always say, of course, in contemplative traditions, the map is not the territory. Knowing something doesn't necessarily mean that you actually will do it. You have to have the experience yourself. And that's exactly where T.S. Eliot goes. The experience of the contemplative tradition, St. John, the dark night of the soul, as in the figure of the 10 stairs. Now, I'm not going to get into a lot of this 10 stairs stuff, but it simply means that as you're going towards, ascending towards God, think of course, the famous Jacob's ladder of the book of Genesis. As you're going towards God, these contemplative Christian mystics said there's steps that you have to take to go towards God, right? And then at line 164, we've got the word desire that gets used, okay? By the way, the 10 stairs, St. John of the Cross, the dark night of the soul, it's all about the journey, right? The symbol of the journey, the mystical ladder to divine love. Desire, he says at line 164, itself is movement. And we find ourselves immediately thinking about several texts. Remember Sidney's thou blind man's mark, thou fool self-chosen snare, fond fancy scum and dregs of scattered thought. Desiring not, he says later in that sonnet, but how to kill desire. The only thing I desire, Sidney says, is to somehow get rid of desire. It's driving me nuts. Remember, of course, Plato will play the game of desire through that 2 boxes, right? The difference, for example, between the exchange of fluids, sex, and the first box, always related to the 5 senses. And this thing we call love of the second box. And as we pointed out many times, Any senior will know and tell you that there's a huge difference between the exchange of fluid, sex, and this thing that we call love. Desire itself is movement, not in itself desirable. Love is itself unmoving. In line 166, we finally get to the word love. It's been waiting for us the whole time. Notice the word love for Christian thinkers, like St. Augustine, is a pivotal word. The student who came to me and declared he was now an atheist, although he'd been raised all his life a Christian. I said, well, I'm not interested in whether you're an atheist. I'm interested in whether you believe in love. And he looked back at me incredulously and he said, love? Of course, it's all I can believe in now. I don't believe in God anymore, so now all I can believe in is love. And I looked back at him and said, yeah, but remember that in your New Testament, in the book of 1 John, we're told God is love. If you believe in love, you believe in God. And tears welled up in his eyes. And he said, why did no one ever give me that argument? If you believe in love, you believe in God. And what is love? Love is the still point of the turning world. He's been waiting to get us here all along. It's taken him 165 lines to finally get to the 166th line. Love is itself unmoving. This is, of course, Aristotle's prime mover, or first mover. Is itself unmoving, only the cause and end of movement, timeless and undesiring, except in the aspect of time, caught in the form of limitation between unbeing and being. Well, this notion of love is God, God is love. In our postmodern world, of course, we play the same game with different language because language is all kind of a myth for us, right? I mean, we're trying to explain the unexplainable. So, for example, we'll talk about what energy is. Oh, yeah, energy, I know what that is. Oh, really? Define it. Well, it's that which can be neither created nor destroyed. What? So it doesn't exist? No, it totally exists. Dude, you just said it can't be created or destroyed, so obviously it doesn't exist. No, it definitely exists. It's everything. Where'd it come from? No, you don't understand. It can't be created or destroyed. Well, that's funny because that's what theologians call God. And now we're using the word energy. Of course, theologians will, and T.S. Eliot will use the word love. And he will say love then is timeless, undesiring, except when it steps out of that first box, out of that second box into that first box, and then it becomes an aspect of time, and then it's caught in the form of limitation. Our human bodies, our human abilities are limited. And because they're limited, it's hard for us to understand even the concept of love. Because it's between unbeing and being. Notice we're between two wars again. Go back again to those earlier comments of that struggle that I think is the way to read for Quartets. T.S. Eliot is acutely aware of that struggle between being and unbeing. Then at line 172, we have a sudden insight. We'll use the word epiphany, and we immediately think of Joyce. Sudden in a shaft of sunlight, and we're going right back now to the beginning of the poem. Again, that return back to the beginning of the poem. Sudden in a shaft of sunlight, even while the dust moves. We were thinking about the dust on the petals, the rose petals. There rises the hidden laughter of children in the foliage. And we're back to it, right? You'll remember that some children were brought to Christ, and he said in Mark 10:14, suffer the children to come unto me, for such are the kingdom of heaven, right? Children and children's laughter takes us back, of course, to line 172, 43, and 44. That is to say, children are not corrupted by Wordsworth's "the world is too much with us," late and soon, getting and spending. Children are corrupted by the getting and spending that somehow captures so much of our lives, right? But rather the here and the now of the laughter, the hidden laughter of children in the foliage. Quick now, here, now. Notice the repetition of the word now. Always, back to the word always again. And then finally, ridiculous. The waste, and then the adjective, sad time. Stretching before and after. The last word of each of these quartets we want to pay attention to. If the first word is time, the last word is after, right? At 2a, of course, here, the major theme is love is the still point. That's it. We've been moving towards a recognition that love is central. Notice how little love was mentioned in Wasteland. Here, it will take center stage. And we're not done with it. We're going to come back to it over and over again. The symbol at 2B here, the Chinese jar, art itself, Keats's Grecian urn all come to mind, those monuments of an aging intellect. The chimera also comes to mind here as a powerful symbol. Our masks. Remember what Prufrock said? That each day we prepare a face to meet the faces that we meet? We're unable to ever be authentic. Why is that? Well, we're distracted from distractions by distractions. We don't know ourselves. Remember, that's what Socrates said was most central. Know yourself. The unexamined life is not worth living. Once we begin to examine, maybe we are not so much like the chimera, lamenting. At 3A, so many references made here, but we'll just stick with the Christian mystics and St. John's, the heart of light, and the quest for the dark night of the soul. You've got to go through the dark night of the soul up the 10 stairs to finally get to enlightenment, realization. We also think as well about those romantics, Wordsworth, Coleridge, especially Keats, all of them gesturing for us in this direction. Finally, at 3B, let's ask this question as we finish the Burnt Norton poem. Why is it that learning so often involves some sense of fear, pain? Remember in our word picture of my Mikey learning to ride his bike, he was horrified by the idea that we were going to take those training wheels off that bike. Why, I asked him. Because I'm going to fall down, it's going to hurt. And I said, oh son, you got no idea. We're going to go out here on this road, and you're going to ride on that bike, and you're going to jack something awful. It's going to be terribly painful. Let's go. All learning is this, isn't it, for us? And yet, the Christian mystics will remind us, it is through that fear and through that pain that we come to liberation, to freedom, to enlightenment. And for my son Michael, he came to the ability to ride that bike. Of course, he did crank, he did fall. That fear and that pain is central to the real learning that takes place. Can you think about a time in your own life when, for you, that kind of pain was provocative? Well, let's finish now. The poet's only hope, we might say, is a glimpse into the truth, a glimpse towards love through verbal patterns. You can't really say what love is. You can't really say what energy is. You can only say about energy that it can't be created or destroyed. Dude, that's not a definition of energy. You can't really say what love is or what God is or what light is. That's the point that Eliot wants to make. T.S. Eliot said this about his attempts in Four Quartets. He says, I wish to write poetry with nothing poetic about it. Poetry standing naked in its bare bones, or poetry so transparent that we should not see the poetry, but that which we are meant to see through the poetry. We are intent, he continues, we are intent on what the poem points at, to get beyond poetry, as Beethoven strove to get beyond music, end quote. Well, in this regards, T.S. Eliot is the spiritual pilgrim. We think of Pilgrim's Progress, but we also, of course, think of Dante's Divine Comedy. Well, our final thoughts now in summation. Notice we move from garden to garden, from sudden illumination or insight to the next illumination or epiphany or insight. With all of that in mind, now that we have worked through, and this has taken a while to do it, and I appreciate you staying with me to do this, it's taken a while to do it. Now that you've read Burnt Norton, you can turn to the second of the four quartets, East Coker. And with a little bit of background information, you'll be able to address those opening lines. In my beginning is my end. I hope that this will be for you a study that you'll enjoy continuing and doing with me. Thank you.